Something about you reached your soulmate before you ever did. It wasn't a message from you, a photograph, or some dramatic announcement. It was simply your name coming up in a conversation with someone from their own circle, and what they heard about you was not what they expected. They may have casually asked how you were doing, expecting an ordinary answer, only to hear something that made them pause. They're really different now. Just a few words, but suddenly their attention was completely there. Because your soulmate may have been carrying an old picture of you in their mind, a version of you frozen in the last chapter you shared. They remembered how you used to react, what you used to care about, how easily certain things affected you, and perhaps even how much you once wanted their attention. But now someone else was describing a person they barely recognized. Maybe they heard that you have become quieter, more confident, more selective, more peaceful. Maybe they heard that you don't explain yourself anymore, that you seem genuinely happy, or that you have stopped looking backward. And something inside them may have shifted when they heard it. They may have tried to act casual, as if your name meant nothing. But then another question appeared. What do you mean they're different? And suddenly, they wanted details they had no intention of asking for before. What changed? When did it happen? Are they really doing that well? Do they still talk about the past? Do they ever mention me? Notice what is happening here. They weren't simply hearing an update about your life. They were discovering that the person they thought they understood may no longer exist in the same form. Imagine opening an old photograph and realizing that the person in the picture has continued living, growing, healing, and changing while you were still remembering them exactly as they were. That can create a strange feeling, curiosity mixed with surprise, nostalgia mixed with uncertainty. And perhaps your soulmate is now wondering what happened during all the time they weren't watching. What did you learn? What did you overcome? What made you change? And most importantly, did you change because of everything that happened between you? Or did you simply become the person you were always meant to become? They may not have the answers yet, but one thing has already happened. Someone from their circle mentioned your transformation, and your soulmate suddenly realized they may know far less about the new you than they thought. And this is where their curiosity may become much stronger than they expected. Because once your soulmate heard that you had changed, they may have started asking questions they never intended to ask. At first, they could have tried to make it sound casual. Maybe they simply wanted to know how you were doing, what you had been up to, or whether anything significant had happened in your life. But underneath those ordinary questions, there may have been something much more personal. They wanted to know who you had become when they weren't around to see it happen. They may have asked, are they really that different now? And then listened carefully to the answer, pretending it was nothing more than curiosity. But why would they care so much about a person they supposedly left in the past? Why would one comment about your growth suddenly make them want details? Because they may have realized that the version of you they remember is based entirely on an old chapter. They know who you were when the two of you were connected, but they don't know who you became afterward. And that gap can create an unexpected kind of fascination. Imagine having an old map of a place you once knew perfectly, only to return years later and discover that new roads have appeared, familiar paths have disappeared, and the landscape looks completely different. You still recognize the place, but you can no longer navigate it the way you once did. That may be how your soulmate is beginning to feel about you. They remember your personality. They remember your habits. They remember the way you communicated, the things that affected you, and perhaps even the way you responded to them. But now, someone from their circle is telling them that you are different, and suddenly their old understanding of you no longer feels reliable. Maybe they heard that you have become much more confident. Maybe someone mentioned that you seem peaceful now, that you don't get caught up in unnecessary drama, or that you have become much more selective about who gets access to you. Perhaps they heard that you are focused on yourself, building something, enjoying your life, or simply carrying yourself with a kind of calmness that wasn't there before. And that detail may have stayed with them longer than they expected. Because there is something powerful about hearing that someone you once knew has stopped being affected by the things that once affected them. Your soulmate may have remembered the moments when you cared deeply about their opinion, their attention, or their presence. So discovering that you no longer seem to need those things can create a strange emotional reaction. They may wonder, do they even care what I think anymore? That question can be much more uncomfortable than simply wondering whether you are doing well. Because if you have genuinely changed, then they may no longer have the emotional influence they once assumed they had. And perhaps that is what they are secretly trying to understand. They may start asking someone from their circle little questions that seem innocent on the surface. Do they seem happy? Are they still the same? Do they ever talk about me? Are they seeing anyone? But notice how quickly the conversation can move from curiosity about your life to curiosity about your feelings. They aren't just trying to learn what you are doing. They are trying to find out whether there is still any part of you connected to the past. And they may be listening for tiny clues. If someone says you seem happier, they may wonder what caused that happiness. If someone says you seem more confident, they may wonder what changed your confidence. If someone says you don't talk about the past anymore, that may affect them even more. Because silence can communicate something powerful without saying anything directly. It can suggest that a chapter has finally stopped controlling you. And perhaps your soulmate is beginning to wonder whether they are still part of your story, or whether they have become nothing more than a memory you rarely visit. That uncertainty can make curiosity grow. They may start comparing the person they remember with the person others now describe. They remember someone who may have once explained themselves, waited for answers, or cared deeply about being understood by them. Now they are hearing about someone who doesn't seem to need anyone's permission to move forward. And that contrast can be difficult to process. Maybe they expected you to remain emotionally connected to the old version of yourself. Maybe somewhere in their mind, they believed that if they ever came back, they would find you exactly where they left you. But what if that assumption was wrong? What if, while they were remembering the old you, life was quietly creating someone completely different? Someone who learned how to stand alone. Someone who stopped chasing explanations. Someone who realized that not every unanswered question deserves to be pursued forever. Someone who discovered that peace can be more valuable than being understood by the wrong person. If they heard even a small hint of that transformation, it may have made them wonder whether you still see them the same way. And this is where the emotional tension begins to build. Because your soulmate may not be ready to admit that hearing about your growth affected them. They may tell themselves they are simply curious. They may say they were only asking because your name came up. But deep down, they may be trying to answer a much more personal question. If I met them today, would they still feel anything for me? They don't know. And not knowing may be exactly what keeps bringing your name back into their thoughts. They may even start imagining what it would be like to see you again after all this time. Would you be nervous? Would you smile? Would you look completely unaffected? Would you speak to them the way you once did? Or would there be a distance they couldn't cross? They may imagine all of these possibilities without realizing that their curiosity is revealing something about themselves. Because when you genuinely stop caring about someone, hearing that they have changed usually doesn't create this much internal questioning. But when the information makes you wonder, compare, remember, and imagine, it means something inside you is paying attention. And perhaps that is what your soulmate is discovering now. They thought they were simply hearing an update about your life. Instead, they were being forced to confront the possibility that the person they once knew has grown beyond the version they remember. And the more they hear about you, the more they may realize that the biggest mystery isn't what happened to you. It's whether the new you would still have any reason to look back at them. And this is where the realization may begin to hit your soulmate in a much deeper way. Because hearing that you have changed is one thing, but understanding that you changed while they were completely outside of your life is something else entirely. They may have started comparing the person they remember with the person others are describing now, and that comparison could be forcing them to look at the past through completely different eyes. Perhaps they once believed they understood you. They thought they knew what made you happy, what hurt you, what you would tolerate, and how you would react when things became difficult. But now they are hearing that you carry yourself differently, that you seem more emotionally grounded, more confident, more selective, or simply less affected by things that once had the power to disturb you. And suddenly they may be asking themselves a question they never expected to ask. When did they become this person? The strange part is that you may not have changed overnight at all. Your transformation may have happened quietly through hundreds of small moments they never witnessed. Every disappointment may have taught you something. Every unanswered message may have made you more independent. Every moment when you had to choose between chasing someone and choosing your own peace may have changed you a little more. And while you were going through those experiences, your soulmate wasn't there to see the process. They only remember the beginning. Now they are hearing about the result. Imagine planting a seed, walking away, and returning years later to find a tree where you expected to see the same patch of soil. You might recognize the place, but you would never understand how much happened while you were gone. That may be exactly what is happening inside your soulmate's mind. They recognize you, but they don't fully understand the journey that created this new version of you. And perhaps that is why the information has affected them so strongly. They may be wondering what you went through. Who helped you? What did you learn? What made you stop caring about certain things? What happened that made you become so comfortable with yourself? And somewhere underneath those questions, there may be another one they don't want to admit. Did I have anything to do with that change? Maybe they wonder whether losing the connection forced you to grow. Maybe they wonder whether the pain between you became part of the reason you became stronger. And that thought could bring a mixture of pride, sadness, and regret. Because if they played any role in the person you became, they may wish they could have been there to witness the transformation instead of hearing about it from someone else. Your soulmate may also be realizing that they remember you through emotions that belong to the past. They remember how you reacted when they were around. They remember the attention you gave them. They remember the questions you asked, the effort you made, and perhaps the way you tried to keep the connection alive. But now someone else is describing a version of you who doesn't seem to need any of that. And that contrast can be difficult for them to process. They may be thinking, would they even treat me the same way now? Perhaps they imagine reaching out and discovering that you are polite but distant. Maybe you would respond, but without the emotional intensity you once carried. Maybe you would listen, but you wouldn't chase the conversation afterward. Maybe you would remember everything, but you wouldn't allow the memories to control your present. And that possibility can make your soulmate realize something important you may have healed without them knowing. They may have assumed that because you once cared deeply, you would always remain emotionally available. But healing changes the rules. When someone has spent enough time rebuilding themselves, they don't necessarily stop remembering the past. They simply stop allowing the past to determine what happens next. And perhaps your soulmate is beginning to sense that about you. They may even feel a strange form of curiosity mixed with insecurity, because they no longer know what effect they would have on you. Before, they may have known exactly how to get your attention. Now they may not be so sure. Before, they may have assumed that one message could reopen an old conversation. Now they may wonder whether you would even respond. Before, they may have believed that if they ever returned, you would understand them immediately. Now they may realize they would have to introduce themselves to the person you have become. That can be a powerful realization. Because your growth has removed their certainty. And when certainty disappears, questions appear. They may begin wondering whether you have met someone else, whether you are happier without the emotional confusion you once experienced, whether you still remember the connection with warmth, or whether you have completely released it. But perhaps the most emotional question is this: do they ever think about me anymore? They may never ask anyone that directly. They may not even admit it to themselves. Instead, they may listen carefully whenever your name comes up. They may notice the tone someone uses when talking about you. They may pay attention to whether you are described as happy, peaceful, successful, or completely moved forward. And every positive detail may create another reaction inside them. Not because they don't want you to be happy, but because your happiness proves something they may not have been ready to accept. You didn't stop living when they left. You didn't remain frozen in the version of yourself they remember. You continued, you learned, you grew, and now there is a possibility that the person they once knew has become someone they would have to earn the right to know again. That realization can change the way they remember everything. They may start looking at old moments and wondering whether they underestimated you. Maybe they thought you needed them more than you actually did. Maybe they thought you would always be there. Maybe they assumed your feelings would remain unchanged simply because theirs were complicated. But now they are hearing from someone they trust that you are different, and suddenly the past doesn't feel as secure as it once did. It feels like something they can no longer return to whenever they want. And perhaps that is the real reason their curiosity has become so intense. They aren't simply curious about who you are now. They are curious about whether there is still any version of the connection left inside the new person you have become. Because if you have truly changed, then they may have to face a difficult truth. The person they once knew may still exist in your memories, but they may no longer have the same place in your heart. And this is where your soulmate's curiosity may turn into something much more personal, because at some point they may stop asking what changed about you and start asking what your transformation means for them. They may have heard that you are more confident, more peaceful, more independent, or simply harder to read than before. And suddenly they may realize that the version of you they once understood is no longer the version standing in front of life today. They may remember how easily they could once tell when something was bothering you, how quickly you responded to them, or how much effort you were willing to put into keeping a connection alive. But now they are hearing that you don't seem to operate that way anymore. And that can create a strange uncertainty inside them, because they may no longer know how you would react if they ever appeared in your life again. Imagine returning to a familiar place after many years and discovering that the building is still there, but the entrance has moved, the rooms have changed, and you no longer know where you belong. That may be the emotional position your soulmate is beginning to experience. They recognize the history, but they don't recognize the rules anymore. They may be wondering whether the new you would still care about the things the old you cared about. Would you still want an explanation? Would you still want an apology? Would their presence still affect you? Or would you simply look at them with calmness and realize that the person who once had such an emotional influence over you no longer does? That last possibility may be especially difficult for them to imagine, because your transformation means they can no longer predict you based on the past. They may remember exactly how you reacted when they pulled away before, but they don't know how you would react now. They may remember how much you wanted clarity, but they don't know whether clarity from them still matters to you. They may remember how deeply you cared, but they don't know whether those feelings survived everything that happened afterward. And this uncertainty can make someone far more curious than certainty ever could. They may start imagining a meeting between you, not necessarily because they are ready to return, but because their mind wants to know what would happen. Would there be awkwardness? Would there be warmth? Would you ask questions? Would you avoid the past? Would you smile as if nothing happened? Or would they see something in your eyes that tells them you remember everything, but simply no longer need anything from them? These imagined scenarios can reveal something important about their emotional state. They are not only thinking about your life, they are thinking about their place in your life. And that is a much deeper question. Perhaps the person from their circle who mentioned your transformation didn't realize how powerful those few words would become. They may have simply said that you seem different now, but your soulmate may have heard something much bigger. You moved forward without them. You became someone new without needing them to witness it. You built parts of yourself they never got to see. And that can create a quiet sense of regret, because they may realize that there was an entire chapter of your life where they had no idea what was happening inside you. They missed the moments that changed you. They missed the struggles that strengthened you. They missed the small victories that rebuilt your confidence. They missed the point where you stopped waiting for certain answers and started creating your own peace. And perhaps that is why your growth feels so mysterious to them. They are seeing the result without knowing the journey. It is like looking at a finished painting without ever witnessing the years of work behind it. They can appreciate what is there, but they cannot fully understand how it came to exist. And maybe they are beginning to wonder whether some of the things you went through after the connection ended were necessary for you to become who you are now. Perhaps they even wonder whether they underestimated your ability to move on. Maybe they thought you would remain emotionally connected to them forever, simply because what you shared once felt so intense. But now they are hearing that you are doing well, and that information may challenge something they quietly believed. They may have assumed that if they ever looked back, they would still have some kind of emotional access to you. But growth changes access. Healing changes access. Self-respect changes access. You can remember someone without remaining available to them. You can appreciate what happened without wanting to repeat it. You can forgive someone without giving them the same position in your life. And your soulmate may be slowly realizing that this is what has happened to you. Perhaps the biggest change others are noticing isn't something visible at all. Maybe it's the way you carry yourself now. You don't seem desperate to be understood. You don't seem interested in proving your worth. You don't seem focused on whether someone from your past notices your progress. And that can be strangely powerful, because the person who no longer needs to be seen becomes much harder to predict. Your soulmate may even wonder whether your transformation was partly caused by the pain they once brought into your life. They may ask themselves whether you became stronger because you had to learn how to survive without the connection. And if they suspect that, there may be a mixture of guilt and admiration inside them. They may feel sorry for what happened, while also being amazed by who you became afterward. But perhaps the deepest realization is still waiting for them. They may have spent so much time remembering the person you were when you knew them, that they forgot one important truth. People do not stop evolving simply because someone stops watching. You continued becoming yourself. And now your soulmate may be discovering that the person they once thought they understood has become someone they would have to get to know all over again. That realization can be exciting, intimidating, and even painful at the same time. Because if they ever decide to approach you again, they cannot simply return to the old dynamic. They would have to meet the new you where you are, and they may finally be wondering whether they are capable of doing that. And now, the entire situation may be leading your soulmate toward one final realization, because after hearing how different you have become, they may no longer be wondering only what happened to you. They may be wondering whether there is still a place for them in the life you have created without them. That question can feel surprisingly heavy. They may have spent a long time believing that the connection between you would always remain somewhere in the background, as though no matter how much time passed, they could return to the same emotional dynamic whenever they were ready. But now they are hearing something completely different. They are hearing that you have grown, that you have changed, and that you may no longer be waiting for anyone to come back and complete a chapter you already learned how to close. And perhaps that is the part they weren't prepared for. They may have expected you to remain emotionally connected to the person they remember, but instead they are discovering someone who learned how to move forward without needing permission from the past. Imagine returning to a place you once called home after years away, only to discover that the person who lived there has completely redesigned the space. The walls may still hold memories, but everything feels different. You recognize where you are, yet you no longer know whether you belong there. That may be how your soulmate feels when they think about you now. They remember the connection, but they don't know what kind of reception the new you would give them. Would you be happy to hear from them? Would you be curious? Would you forgive them? Would you simply be polite and continue with your life? They may have no idea, and that uncertainty could be exactly what keeps you on their mind. Perhaps they have started imagining what it would be like to see you again, not because they have already decided to return, but because they are trying to understand what your transformation means. They may wonder whether you would still look at them the same way. They may wonder whether the memories still carry emotional weight for you. They may even wonder whether someone else has become important in your life while they were away. And beneath all of those questions may be something even more vulnerable. Did I lose my place completely? That question can hurt because your growth may have shown them that life did not stop when the connection ended. You kept becoming stronger. You learned things. You discovered parts of yourself they never knew existed. You may have stopped looking for validation from people who couldn't give you certainty. You may have learned to recognize the difference between someone who misses you and someone who is actually capable of showing up for you. And if your soulmate realizes that, they may understand that simply returning is not enough. They would have to approach you differently. They would have to respect the person you have become instead of expecting you to become the person they remember. They might need to acknowledge the past, take responsibility for their part in it, and accept that you are allowed to have different standards now. This is where your transformation becomes much more powerful than appearance or circumstance. You didn't simply change your routine. You changed what you are willing to accept. You changed how you respond to uncertainty. You changed how you protect your peace. And perhaps that is what the person from their circle was really noticing when they said you were different. They may have been noticing that you no longer carry yourself like someone waiting to be chosen. You carry yourself like someone who has already chosen themselves. And that difference can be impossible for your soulmate to ignore once they hear about it. They may even begin to understand that your growth wasn't designed to make them jealous or regretful. You didn't become stronger, so they would hear about it. You became stronger because life kept moving, whether they were present or not. And perhaps that is what makes the realization so emotional. They were not there to witness the transformation, but now they are hearing about the results. Someone else gets to describe the confidence they never saw developing. Someone else gets to notice the peace they didn't know you were searching for. Someone else gets to meet the version of you they never had the opportunity to know. And your soulmate may quietly wonder whether they missed the most important chapter because they were too focused on the ending of the old one. Maybe they are realizing that they remembered you based on who you were during the connection, while everyone around you has had the chance to see who you became afterward. That can create a very strange feeling of distance. They may feel close to the memories, but far away from the person. They may know your history, but not your present. And perhaps that is why their curiosity continues growing. They want to know what you think now, what you believe now, what you want now, what you would tolerate now, what you would never accept again. Most importantly, they may want to know whether they still matter to you at all. But there is something they may eventually have to accept. Your growth does not automatically create an invitation. Someone can become curious about you without being entitled to your attention. Someone can regret losing access to you without automatically receiving that access again. And if your soulmate ever does come closer, the connection would have to begin from the present, not from the past. They would have to meet the person you are now, not expect the person you used to be to return on command. Perhaps that is the true message hidden inside everything they recently heard about you. You didn't simply become different. You became less predictable because you stopped living according to other people's expectations. You became stronger because you stopped waiting for someone else to validate your worth. And you became more peaceful because you realized that some things are better released than endlessly explained. So if your soulmate is suddenly curious about you, let that curiosity belong to them. Let them wonder. Let them remember. Let them ask questions. You don't need to chase their attention to prove that you have changed. Your transformation already speaks for itself. And perhaps the most unexpected part of all is this. They may have originally wanted to know what happened to the person they once knew, but eventually they may realize that the person they are curious about is someone they never truly got the chance to know. The new you may still remember the old connection, but you are no longer required to live inside it. And if they ever find the courage to approach you again, they may discover that the real question isn't whether you changed. Everyone around them has already answered that. The real question is whether they have changed enough to deserve a place in the life you built after they were gone.